has the fire department across the street been considered, since that's so close?
I'm personally not sure.
Depends on how large the property is.
Yeah.
It also depends on the height. If, you know, if there's an existing building, that's typically the preferred way to go than building a new site. So part of that search area that Ryan was talking about, Verizon Wireless will look to see, are there any existing structures that they could go on? But we also have to look at what the county regulations require in terms of height of a building, when you can put something on a building, how tall it has to be. And I think Boyd was gonna talk also about the other Montgomery County schools question that was in there.
Yeah, Clarksburg High School was looked at one time, but I believe in the process of another carrier, we were dealing with one carrier, but another carrier then went on a neighboring property, a site near Clarksburg High School. So then the other carriers could co-locate on that. So Clarksburg High School did not end up getting a pole in that situation. So it's just the timing of it. So this pole's still there by the school, but the neighboring property is hosting it on their site. So that's kind of how that works. And the other schools you mentioned, I don't think we've had any contact about those. And a lot of it has to do with the density. You know, the more people, the more demand. You know, 90%. Over 90% of the adult population is walking around with these devices. That's of the United States. That's in a Pew Research study. So I don't know where the technology's going, but it doesn't seem like it's going away. So there's a demand for it.
That, just a tidbit that I learned in my research. The firefighters unions are very adamantly against putting them on buildings, on their sites.
Well, there's one going on a fire station property by, I believe, Lake or Montgomery. It could be Montgomery Blair. It borders the school, and they're replacing a tower there, or a pole. So they have them too.
Yeah, probably.
Pardon?
Probably.
Because Blair won't let them put the cell phone tower on the school property?
No, what happened is there was one there before, and it's being replaced. And that's a unique site because half the property is, I believe, park and planning, or the county. I guess they funded the turf field there. So it's technically not even near the school property, though it's near the parking lot and the field. So it's kind of a unique property situation there. But yeah, there's been an existing pole by that particular fire station, and they do have them at some public safety sites.
Could I have a point of clarification? I have that on here, the International Association of Firefighters, although obviously some stations don't do it. I know that the reason that the International Association of Firefighters passed their statement, their official position not to use the stations as cell tower sites is because there was a study done many years ago, you could read about it online, where there were a tower had gone up and the firefighters actually got sick in the station, and they did different biological testing, neurological, to see what was going on. And as a result of that, you can actually read the whole document, their actual position statement. I know that in California, when there was going to be towers proposed on the LA firefighters, there's a bunch of letters you can read where they are adamantly opposed to that. And one of the things is that a lot of people just aren't aware of all the issues related to cell towers. I know I wasn't 10 years ago.
So, next question, and we can circle back to some of these topics toward the end, but I want to make sure we cover as much as possible. So the question is, so there's be two piggyback questions. Was the infants and toddlers program, which is adjacent to Neelsville, notified of the cell phone tower placement by MCPS, or its principal, I guess where we say we're Verizon? And then the piggyback to that is, has the infants and toddlers families been notified? MCPS has a no cell tower on elementary property. This property has infants and toddlers, even younger children. Why would MCPS violate that policy for Neelsville property? I'm sorry. So, and that's.
Do you want me to address that?
Yes, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Let me just start real quick with the notice, and Boyd will talk about the policy. As part of the zoning application, Verizon Wireless will be required to send out notices to, I believe it's all adjoining and confronting properties, and then all neighbors within a certain radius, and all civic associations within a certain radius. So if the families of the infant and child program are in the area, they will be getting a notification. Again, nothing has been applied for yet. That's all part of the application. And what that means is they will all be notified of the public hearing, and anybody is welcome to come to the public hearing. But Verizon Wireless will comply with the notice requirements to alert people to the application being filed, and that there will be a public hearing. And then Boyd will talk about the policy from the county.
Yeah, there's not a written policy against placing in elementary schools. We have one site, Daly Elementary, that has a pole that's been there for a bit. But just general practice, because this elementary school properties are smaller, they're not as appropriate of a site because of the setbacks that Ryan talked about. There's just not the space where you can put it, on the side of the school grounds, like you can at a high school or at a middle school. It's a primarily land issue.
Couple of follow-on questions before we go on to the next one. I think you had a question.
I just had a clarifying question. The notice, is that allowed, like, let's say we receive a notice next door at Infants and Toddlers. I'm representing Infants and Toddlers, over 500 people I'm on behalf of. Are we allowed to, let's say we get a notice, can we photocopy that and give it to families? Because we have families all the way up
It's a
Poolsville.
public hearing.
I mean, we're allowed to.
Absolutely.
Public
Okay.
meeting.
Okay.
All I'm talking about is
And then they can make their own choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is just what
Perfect.
we're
Thank you.
required to do.
So it sounds like there's some process steps that are yet to happen. So one of the questions that could be related was, I'm actually going to summarize this to a bigger question, but which was, if the site has been reviewed several times, why haven't the balloon test, environmental test, et cetera, already been done? And the cell tower process has already recommended the application at a transmission facility coordinator group meeting. I think the bigger question I'd like to kind of add to that is and I guess it's probably a question for Boyd, or you can defer to whoever you want, is where is this in the process in terms of what has already been done, what is ahead of us, and what does that timeline and process look like if everything were to just continue from step to step to step?
I can give what I know and then pass it on. This went through it's called the Transmission Coordinating Group back in January, and it's gone through that a couple times because they require, it's been a couple months to come back and reapply their application and go through the review process. Now that board, they give a recommendation to move the project for zoning, and that's kind of where we're at now in the regulatory process. What we're having here is more meeting, another follow-up meeting on the input from the school and the PTA, because we were here 2 years ago. We're asked to come back and update new members and parents. So that's kind of how we're at in the school process.
Right, and then in the zoning process, nothing has been filed with the county at this point in terms of what's called a conditional use application. And what that means is the zoning body that makes the decision has sections in the code where all of the requirements in order to obtain that conditional use are set out. So Verizon Wireless has to provide the county with substantial materials. I mentioned before the balloon tests, the photo simulations. That NEPA test is not required as part of that, but there are other elements that we have to meet when we file that application. We go to Park and Planning, we have an initial meeting, and then it's filed, and if Park and Planning determines that that is a complete filing, then it gets filed with the Office of Zoning and Hearing Administration. So we are not at that point yet. The Tower Committee process is done, and then as Boyd mentioned, depending on when you actually go to file the conditional use application, you may have to update that tower committee recommendation so that it's not stale. So with the conditional use process, there's always a public hearing. This meeting is not a required part of the process. It's something Verizon Wireless does to inform the community, and when they're invited, they want to come and provide the information. It's not required. The public hearing is required, and that's what notice will go out about, and that's open to the public. After the public hearing, it's really up to the hearing examiner how long the record stays open. Then the hearing examiner makes a recommendation. Then it goes to the Board of Appeals for a final decision. And then there's appellate processes that can happen after that. But it's also a significant time period in terms of allowing the public to get that notice. Once everything is filed with the Office of Zoning and Administrative Hearings, I don't think a public hearing can be set for 30 days. So that's my sort of
My
background.
understanding is there's a part of one of discussing the big process, obviously, from not the zoning process specifically, but just the overall process, whether it's NCPS policy or otherwise, that asks for or requires support from the school and the community and the PTSA. Could you elaborate on what those requirements are and which of those are requirements and which are input and where they fit into the process?
Yeah, and I had, kind of took this from the policy, but, and this is the meeting here is for, to satisfy school board policy. And what the board looks for is input from school staff, PTSA, community groups, and facility staff. So our department, we have our architect and other staff, they look at it and they say, well, yeah, the layout looks okay, and, you know, they have to give it an okay too and approve it before it goes through our system. And he, our architect, our staff architect, has looked at this. He looks at all the telecom proposals and even the co-locates. There's an existing pole and antennas going on. The board has given the authority to approve the placement of monopoles to the superintendent, though the board is notified, you know, of his decision. So we're not at that point. And then, of course, we have to execute a lease, but that occurs after the superintendent has given his approval.
Could I add
And then
something?
the superintendent signs the lease.
What I've seen, I mean, I know you can even go online and watch when the Wooten High School, when a tower was proposed there, in 24 hours, that tower was stopped because the people in the room didn't want that tower. And so when I'm hearing this process that involves a hearing, I would say, I think it's really important for the community to be a part of the decision-making process. And my concern is that by the time you get to the hearing, things are already really far along. And one of the things that I've been recommending to MCPS is that the community be a part of the decision-making process, which also means inviting all the feeder schools as well, kindergarten, you know, elementary schools, because everyone's going to be moving through this school. And in a magnet school, really, the notice should be countywide. So I know, I mean, I'm coming from Greenbelt, from Prince George's County, where I am, where a vote was made and all the sites became cell tower sites without anyone actually knowing about it.
I'm gonna add a few,
Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I guess I'm new to this issue and I only heard about it, I don't know, maybe 2 meetings ago. So, the board is collecting information, essentially, you're just wanting to talk to the community, and this is just one of the process, but we're just as PTSA. So, really, ultimately, we can have our vote here, but that doesn't really hold maybe a lot of sway.
No, it does.
The superintendent,
Does it or does?
Yeah, it does.
Listens to that. I mean, he takes a consideration of when we have a new superintendent,